But Egypt's rigid style wasn't good enough for the Greeks. Their culture still demanded realistic statues. So they did something that no artists had done before. They used their eyes. They studied every detail of the human body. Bit by bit, they strived to understand exactly how to reproduce it in their art. Ears started to look like ears. Real torsos began to appear. Each artist building on the progress of others. And this explosive period, within just a few generations, produced what no civilization on Earth had ever produced before. This is Critian Boy, and he's a milestone in the history of art. He's carved from marble, and yet his skin appears to be taut over muscles. His thighs look like they're bearing weight. His back undulates over his spine, which curves down perfectly in a relaxed stance. Greek artists had created precisely what their society had urged them to: a truly realistic human body. And yet, this is the final clue in our story, not because it's realistic, but because of the effect this realism had on the Greeks.
This exquisite statue gives us an absolutely historic moment. For the very first time, man creates an image of himself that's fully nude and truly lifelike. So, for the Greeks, this was like the pinnacle of artistic achievement. They'd reached their goal, art as the perfect imitation of life. Now they could carry on producing gorgeous statues like this forever. But that's just it. They didn't.
Within a generation, the Greeks stopped making realistic statues like this. But why? Why, when their culture had made them strive for reality, did they almost immediately abandon it? The answer reveals something fundamental about us as human beings. When it comes to images of the body, we're driven not just by culture, but also by something we thought existed only in the earliest humans. It's that primeval instinct to exaggerate, as observed by Professor Ramachandran in The Venus of Willendorf. The instinct, he argues, is hardwired into the brains of all humans, even if in some cultures it was suppressed.
The principle of exaggeration must be something that is hardwired in the neural machinery of the visual pathways in the brains of every human being. And when you speak of universals, you have to realize that what's universal is the propensity to do this, but this can be overridden by culture. For example, if you look at Egyptian art, the pictures of anything are highly rigid, highly schematic, and they lack the energy and movement and vigor that you could convey in the human form using the principle of exaggeration.
Professor Ramachandran is convinced that Greek culture now had the right ingredients to reawaken this ancient instinct. And it was this that made them reject the realism that they'd created.
The problem with the Critian Boy is it was too realistic, and that makes it boring. If art's about realism, why do you need art? You can just go around looking at things. They quickly realized that this was boring, that they had to do interesting things with the image, distorted in specific ways, not randomly distorted, but lawfully distorted in order to exaggerate the brain's aesthetic response to that body.
So the Greeks' dissatisfaction with reality was perfectly natural. They couldn't know it, but they were pre-programmed to want more. Like the nomads, thousands of years before them, they were hankering after something more human than human.
The question now was, how could they adapt a real body into something that would satisfy them, into statues worthy of their temples? The race was on. This was the new challenge facing Greek artists. Merely exaggerating muscles wasn't enough. They had to discover their equivalent of the red striped stick. And in about 450 BC, a sculptor and mathematician called Polykleitos made the breakthrough that would help them achieve just that. Polykleitos wanted to find a way of showing the physical potential of an athlete. He wanted a body that was both relaxed and yet appeared ready to move. He created a series of theoretical rods passing through key points of the body. He also divided the body down the centre and across the middle. With these 4 quarters marked out, he began to move his figure in specific ways. He bent one knee and moved the same foot to ensure that it bore little or none of the body's weight. He bent one arm and left the other relaxed. He rotated the body so the hips and head faced one way and the chest the other. Now the body was divided into clear quarters. Top and bottom mirrored each other, one side in motion, the other at rest. The angles of the body, which were once horizontal, now opposed and also complemented each other. So Polykleitos captured an athlete poised for action. But for other artists, it was also the key to understanding how they could at last represent physical perfection. Everything had been leading to this, the moment when ancient Greece created something more human than human. They are known as the Riace bronzes. They are what Stefano Mariottini found on the seabed. Now displayed in Reggio on the southernmost tip of Italy, they're relatively unknown to the world at large. And yet, I'm not alone in believing that nowhere on earth can you see sculpture as astounding as this.
I have seen a lot of statues in my time, and from all over the world, but nothing quite matches these in terms of skill and execution. I'm not one to gush, but if you pressed me, I'd have to come out with it, that these are absolutely the best statues ever made.
As many modern sculptors are embarrassed to admit, this quality of craftsmanship, this subtlety of detail, is impossible to achieve today. It is genuinely hard to believe that these were made not just before the Italian Renaissance, but 2,000 years before. Inspired by the rules of Polyclitus, the arrangement of the limbs, the direction of the head and chest make them seem alive. In fact, at first glance, they appear to be as realistic a representation of the human body as you could hope to find.
But then, when you look again, you realize that there's something not quite right. Yes, it resembles a human being, very much so. But in fact, it's not anatomically possible for a man, however athletic, to look like this.
Polyclitus did indeed want to divide the sections of the body clearly, but here it's been taken to extremes. The division between top and bottom has been exaggerated by a crest of muscle across the waist that's more defined than it ever could be on a real human. The legs have been made artificially long to match perfectly the length of the upper body. To stress the symmetry and separation of the two sides, there's an implausibly deep groove running up the center of the chest. And while the chest muscles are totally relaxed, the muscles on the back are tense and impossibly well defined. The central channel of the spine is deeper than you'd ever see on a real human. And to improve the line of their back, these men have no coccyx bone at the base of their spine. These are unrealistic bodies. Reality's been exaggerated. And that's why they're so overwhelming. The instinct to do this had been alive in the brains of early humans and had now been revived. The first civilization capable of realism had used exaggeration to go further. And it's that instinct which still dominates our world today.